ഇന്നിപ്പോൾ ഈ അഭിമുഖത്തിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് നമ്മളുടെ കൂടെ ഉള്ളത് ലോകപ്രശസ്തനായിട്ടുള്ള ശ്രീലങ്കൻ തമിഴ് കവി ചേരനാണ്. ചേരൻ ഇപ്പോൾ കാനഡയിലാണ്, ഒരു അധ്യാപകനും അക്കാഡമീഷ്യനുമാണ് അവിടെ. വളരെ കാലം എക്സൈലിൽ എന്താ പറയുക, നാട് കടത്തപ്പെട്ട പോലെ ജീവിച്ചൊരു കവിയായിട്ടും എല്ലാ കവിതകളും ഇപ്പോഴും തമിഴിൽ തന്നെയാണ് എഴുതിക്കൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്നത്. ഇറ്റ്സ് എ ഗ്രേറ്റ് പ്ലഷർ ആൻഡ് ഓണർ ടു ഹാവ് ചേരൻ ഹിയർ വിത്ത് അസ്. So let us begin by a question about the origins of the poetry that you are writing. So how did you come to face yourself as a poet? How did you start writing poetry, your engagement with poetry in general?
I started writing poetry at a very early age, when I was in grade 3 or grade 4, actually. And my father was one of the great poets in Tamil in Sri Lanka. So he had a very interesting habit of reading poetry. So he writes his poems, and he takes it and he starts reading it aloud, walking in the house. So then he expects all of his kids to follow him and listen to the poetry. So we used to listen to his new poetry, right? So and whenever we go walks in the paddy fields, he walks first. We all follow, and then he starts saying certain kinds of poetry that is easy to commit to memory.
Right.
With a rhyme and a thing, right? So that is how I get into poetry.
You were talking about an epistemic violence that was committed by the state, the Sinhalese state, on the ethnic minority, especially Tamils and Tamil-speaking Muslims. So can you elaborate a bit on that, and how that epistemic violence affected you as a poet and also a generation of creative writers and artists of Sri Lanka?
Well, I mean, this is a very very good question. But we should start by talking first about epistemic privilege before we start discussing about the poetry and epistemic violence. The epistemic privilege is something which we need to understand very closely, because each and every one, or each and every different kind of communities, they have some very specific experiences. They are the only ones that are privy to that experience. Like, for example, women, or the women they have certain kinds of experiences which I will not be able to write about, because I will not able to go through that particular kind of experience the way that women go through. In a similar fashion, there will be certain kinds of experiences of an oppressed minority, or the tribal people that are resisting, and the daily racism that black communities in the other communities face in North America. It's a daily racism. It's a subtle ways it will express it. That particular experience cannot be felt by anyone from the dominant groups. So that gives them some kind of a epistemic privilege to write about this particular kind of thing. I'm not saying that I cannot write about their experiences, but I cannot speak for them. I can speak next to them. That creates some kind of a different thing, right?
Solidarity.
Yes, in solidarity, I can speak next to them, right? This is what about the Rohingya. The Rohingya, my latest Rohingya poems. Yeah. The fact that I was there, that's a different story. But the moment I see watch some of the clips, the moment I heard some of the thing, it immediately triggered the similar powerful kind of poetry in me, because I had the similar experiences in Sri Lanka.
You mentioned in your last answer about the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar and how you witnessed to certain episodes. And it's also visible, like it's present in your recent sets of poetry about the Rohingya crisis. How did you place yourself? Like, how did you reach that point of crisis? And especially this question comes from, my understanding of Buddhism, its presence in both Sri Lanka and in Myanmar, as an authoritarian religion, as a state religion, and how do you consider that two sets of violence and your presence in both these places, and Buddhism as in this case, as a perpetrator of violence, which is ironic enough.
I think the thinking about violence and talking about violence and writing about violence, both in academic fashion or in a creative way. Let me elaborate, bit by bit what exactly the issue, right? In the case of Sri Lanka, the violence before the violence on the part of us, that means Tamils there, um, they believed in non-violence. So there have been a long history of non-violent resistance to Sri Lankan state or the Sinhala Buddhist state, satyagrahas and all this kind of thing. For at least for 35, 40 years, that non-violent resistance has not been rewarded. In fact, it has been brutally crushed. Right? We need to look at this in the context of what happened in the Indian freedom movement. So Mahatma Gandhi visited Jaffna, and a lot of other senior leaders visited Jaffna. The Tamil people in that region, in Sri Lanka, they have collected a lot of money and donated it to Indian freedom movement. When we grew up, if you go to every single house in our region, you will see the photographs of Subhash Chandra Bose and Gandhi and Nehru. Those are the ones we grew up with in terms of, right? There was a very strong connection between the Tamils in Sri Lanka and the Indian freedom movement. So it has been rightfully acknowledged by Gandhi and Nehru and all the other things. But that tradition, the political, historical, and social relationship, the close relationship between the Tamils and the larger Indian national movement, Indian independent movement, it has completely been erased now. Nobody in the current positions of power, they do not pay any attention. They don't even know that there is this kind of a history between India and Tamil. So what really happens, and after the independence, the successive Indian governments, they have tried to appease the Sri Lankan state. So they think it was necessary to appease the Sri Lankan state in a diplomatic way, and Sri Lankan government and its system has been very successfully, shrewdly. They were very diplomatic. They managed to use the Indian thing while oppressing the Tamils, right? So this is the context in which we need to understand the overall the Tamil struggle for independence or liberation in the context of India and in the context of Sri Lanka. In the case of Buddhism, as I mentioned very briefly there, there are a lot of anthropologists and scholars like Tambaya and others. They have called it a kind of a political Buddhism, right, or is the Protestant Buddhism. It is completely there's a gap between what exactly the principles of Buddhism and what exactly the government and the monks and all the other Buddhist establishments to practice. They would even every time a soldier or the military goes to war zone in the northern east, the Buddhist monks will go and they bless them. There were all kinds of things. In fact, there was a discourse that killing of Tamils is justified by Buddhism. You could read in all these kind of discourses, right? And most importantly, the official narrative, implicitly and explicitly, is a racist narrative. Tamils are, the dark South Indian darky fellows. We are Aryans. We are from the other. Even though it's a myth, but that is how the official history, official narrative is being formed. And the Buddhism has added to the whole discourse. And then one of the reasons why they wanted to make Buddhism as a state religion and the state as a singular Buddhist state, on the understanding that, again, mythological way of saying the Buddha has visited Sri Lanka thrice, it's a thrice blessed, and Sinhalese has only one country, that is Sri Lanka, but Tamils are all over. So it's a kind of a existential argument that one could make. So it's a combination of all these things. That particular kind of, I would call it a kind of insecurity that is part of the state and part of the psyche of the people. that leads to this kind of a thing. So the violence has been justified, and you see in the past 2 or 3 years, Buddhist monks are in the forefront of attacking Muslims, Muslim institutions, and the Muslim people.
Sri Lanka.
Oh, it's been in Sri Lanka. You could see several video clips available. The Buddhist monks are burning Muslim monk shops.
One of the things that becomes very important for a poet in exile, especially, is a loss of a certain sense of geographical intimacy to your own land. And especially in your poems, we can see the recurrent presence and like a permanent presence of the landscape of Sri Lanka, and present as the trees and the particular flora and fauna of the place. So how do you keep that landscape with you, especially when you're far away bodily, like in physically, when you're far away from that land? How do you see landscapes playing a part in your poetry?
I have always been attached to landscapes. In fact, I've been arguing in my academic work, but the notion of Tamil identity is not really restricted to a territory. My argument is that Tamil identity is based on landscape, like tonight, the concept of tonight, right? Even when in a very traditional way, when they defined Tamil, they used to say, Vadavangadam Mudal Kumari Tenkumari Aire Tamil Huru Nalalagam. That means the Tamil speaking world of goodness. Wherever the Tamil is being spoken, that should be a Tamil land, right? It doesn't have to be a very specific kind of territory, right? So the attachment to a particular kind of landscape, and as the concept tonight says, it's the basis of Tamil identity. So we cannot simply confine it to Tamil Nadu or to Sri Lanka or to Malaysia. Now, because of the diaspora, it has taken up the whole thing, right? So in a theoretical fashion, I have added one more tonight to this traditional 5 tonight in my thesis. That is what we call Aram tonight. Aram tonight means exile, leaving the whole thing, and then you create a kind of state without a territory, statelessness, exile, living in the diaspora, right? So that has become a peculiar and a very significant Tanai.
More like a Tanai in your imagination.
And also you create all these kind of nostalgic landscape within your household. You have Sambarati Poo, and you have Karuvapila tree, and you have all this kind of tea. And when you go out, and if you have in large numbers like in Toronto, 300,000, 400,000 people, you have recreate the entire festival. And then, one of the results is the Canadian government has proclaimed January as a Tamil Heritage Month. So every January there will be Tamil Heritage Month celebration, right? It has been declared. The similar Tamil Heritage the months have been declared in some of the states in the US. So the Tamil Heritage Month, like a Black Heritage, Black History Month, has become a very important thing in Canada for the Tamils and for the politicians, for all kind of thing, right? So in terms of I'll go back to the landscape. As you said, there are all kinds of reference to the different kinds of trees and different kinds of landscape. I am very attached to that one. So I am a lover of nature. But then when I went into exile, I started living in various places. So you would notice there is the change in metaphors, change in the way I talk about landscapes, and you find the different kinds of imagery from landscape. For example, in some of poetry, there's a reference to a cold sun in the middle of the day. We cannot simply. I never had the idea of the sun can be that cold when I was living in Jaffna. It's always hot, right? But in Toronto, when you inside, you see it's so sunny, so bright. You open the thing, it's minus 25. So when I was young, I really liked Dostoevsky. So then the White Nights, right? So that was the first time in the Russian novels we came to know about snow and then the whites. We had no idea what exactly it's going to be, but it was very powerful writing. So 20 years now, after watching 20 years of snow, and then it says a completely different kind of image. And then, especially in my poems, the giant tree in the rainforest, and the elder. Elder is about my encounter with the First Nations elder, right in the middle of the expanse of snowstorm and snow, right? So all those poems, we will have a completely different kind of landscape and the words and the image. So you could call it either in a very academic term, the progression of the text, or we could call in simple terms as a point, how imagination and words and landscape change when you change. That transforms your poetry. But even now I write about, Rohingyas or about things, you will see there are some kind of a different kind of relationship, right? I will no longer speak for the people in the Northern East, but I will speak next to them, because I cannot simply claim I can represent them politically, but I cannot simply tell them this is the way you should do your politics. So I have that particular understanding, and that is why I talked about the responsibility of distance and irresponsibility of distance about the diaspora. Responsibility of the distance means the diaspora, even though it's very powerful, politically powerful, economically powerful, the Tamil diaspora, they should not dictate their wishes to the people in the Northern East. If we do, that becomes the irresponsibility of distance. You are not part of them. You only share the pleasures and all kinds of things. You may share pain too, I know, but we should not take that kind of a position. When we do, that is the irresponsibility of violence, irresponsibility of distance. I say the responsibility of distance means we should be responsible. We should be ethically, morally responsible by not appropriating their voice. Right? We can speak next to them, and we need to be responsible in that way in the diaspora.
ഒരുപാട് തിരക്കുകൾ അദ്ദേഹത്തിനുണ്ടായിരുന്നു. അതിനിടയിലും നമ്മളുടെ കൂടെ കുറച്ച് സമയം ചെലവഴിക്കാൻ അദ്ദേഹം സന്നദ്ധനായി. അതിന് ഞാൻ കവി ചേരന് ഹൃദയംഗമമായി നന്ദി പറഞ്ഞുകൊള്ളുന്നു.